Well, um, so let me find my notes here. So the speaker we have tonight, Janet Urban, she has been a member of World of Life for more than 15 years and attending here for almost 18 years. You will often find her playing the synthesizer for worship or helping at the nursery or even ushering. She also oversees the offering counting team. Um, and she's also ministering in various other ways around the church. She is very active here at Word of Life. She and her husband, John, have 4 wonderful young adults who are each involved in church ministry in different areas. She also works as a freelance accountant and volunteers as a treasurer for a local BSA scout troop. And in her spare time, she takes care of her household, which includes 3 cats and 2 dogs. It's a full house. She also loves to read and play games. And, and she's really good at playing games, by the way. And she's teaching herself Spanish and Portuguese, being inspired with the latter upon going on a mission trip to Brazil earlier this year. So how about we all welcome her this evening, and I'll give her, well, she has her mic, I think. You have a mic. You don't? Okay.
So while I was on that Brazil trip, I had to give my testimony there, and the pastor there suggested that I should get up and speak more often. So when I was asked to speak, here I am. Not something I would normally volunteer for, but so as it was mentioned in my that I've been attending here for a long time. I've been a Christian for many years, but one of the dangers of being a Christian for so many years is that it becomes easy to think that I'm a pretty good person. And after all, I became a Christian as a teenager. I was a good kid. I was pretty agreeable to my parents and the other authorities in my life. My Christian testimony doesn't include any dramatic life changes where I was, in lifestyle of drugs or alcohol or anything of that nature. And I was surrounded by pretty good people. I met my husband in church. He was a great guy then, and he's continued to be throughout our marriage. And he's been pretty patient with me for almost 33 years. My son became a Christian when he was 4 years old. And how sinful could he have been at 4 years old? But my girls weren't much older than that when they became Christians too and confessed the Lord. So God got them young. He got a pretty good deal getting hold of them so young, right? But in Luke chapter 7, Jesus was having dinner with Simon the Pharisee when a sinful woman came into the room, and she washed Jesus' feet with her tears and anointed them with oil. And Simon was rather surprised that Jesus would allow such a thing to happen. Beginning in verse 41, Jesus responded to Simon with a brief story. He said, "There was a certain creditor who had 2 debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. A denarii is about a day's wage. And so when they had nothing with which to repay, he freely forgave them both. So Jesus asked Simon, 'Tell me, therefore, which one of them will love him more?' And Simon answered and said, 'Well, I suppose the one for whom was forgiven more.' And Jesus said, 'Yes, you have answered rightly.' So then he turned to the woman and he said to Simon, 'You see this woman? I entered your house, and you gave me no water for my feet, but she has washed my feet with her tears and wiped them with the hair on her head. You gave me no kiss, but this woman has not ceased to kiss my feet since the time I came in. You did not anoint my head with oil, but this woman has anointed my feet with fragrant oil. And therefore I say to you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But to whom little is forgiven, the same loves little.'" Now, Pastor Phil, he often prays for the children as they leave for Sunday school that they will live their lives without regret. And my own children have grown up with this prayer over them, and I believe that they have been blessed with fewer regrets in many areas of their lives as a result. So, if we're to strive to live for a pure and righteous life, are we then sentenced to a life of loving Jesus less? No, of course not. That can't be the lesson that we're supposed to learn from this story. So, how do we change that course? We can grow in our understanding of our sin and God's holiness. The more that we can increase our understanding of that gap between our sinfulness and God's holiness, the more we can increase our love for God and understand the sacrifice that Jesus provided us. And then we can become more appreciative of God's grace given to us. This is the basic gospel message, the good news that God brings to us. But I think sometimes, as we are in the church for a long time, we forget how much that we have been forgiven and how much we can be grateful to God. First, we need to change the way we think of sin. We need to seriously consider all sin. There's no major sins or minor sins. Sins that are sometimes more easily hidden, such as pride and fear, are as serious to God as the more obvious ones of lying and stealing. Sometimes some sin can become so normal or commonplace in our lives that we forget to identify it for what it is. Maybe anger isn't in your home every day, but what about complaining or becoming impatient? Or when I have to ask the same person over and over, don't leave your dishes in the house. Remember to put them in the dishwasher. Am I still being as patient and as kind as I should be? Jesus reminds us to take our sins seriously. It's one of his commandments from the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew 5:29 and 30, he says, "If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you, for it is more profitable for you than one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you, for it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell." So now, before anybody starts pulling out any knives, remember it's not really our body parts that cause us to sin. Sin begins in the heart and with our thoughts. James 1:14 and 15 says, "But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's fully grown, brings forth death. Those thoughts and lusts give birth to the words and actions for which we are to be held accountable to God." Matthew 12:34 to 37 talks about God holding us accountable for our words. He says at the end of that, "But I say to you that every idle word men may speak, they will give account of it in the day of judgment." Every idle word. "For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned." In 2 Corinthians 5:10, he holds us accountable for our actions. He says, "For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one may receive the things done in the body according to what he has done, whether good or bad." So sin is any word, any action, any thought that violates God's commands or instructions. And we need to pray that God will help us to recognize our sin and to be convicted of our sin. That sounds scary to me, to ask to be convicted of sin. Nobody wants to be convicted in court and pronounced guilty, but we are already guilty. And the path to righteousness begins with that recognition. So the Holy Spirit is gentle and will guide us with a gentle hand if we're sensitive to it. Sin is wrongdoing and evil. We need to recognize it for what it is and hate it the same way that God hates it, instead of being comfortable with it. God declares how much he hates sin in Proverbs 8:13. He says, "The fear of the Lord is to hate evil. Pride and arrogance and the evil way and the perverse mouth I hate." And God then tells us to hate that sin and evil too, the same way he does. In Psalm 97:10, he says, "You who love the Lord hate evil. He perseveres with the souls of his saints. He delivers them out of the hand of the wicked." In Amos 5:15, he says, "Hate evil, love good." So, then next, we should be praying for understanding of God's holiness. On a human scale of good and evil, from 1 to 100, with evil being the most, with 1 being the most evil, and holiness and righteousness being at the high end, we might think we measure up pretty well. After all, the fruit of our lives is certainly better than the worst of humanity. We're not like mass murderers or Hitler or anything. But when we add God to the scale and we realize that the holiness of God goes to infinity, we realize that our goodness is like filthy rags in comparison. Exodus 15:11 says, "Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glorious deeds, doing wonders?" 1 Chronicles 16:29 tells us to worship the Lord in the splendor of holiness. So first we recognize our sin, and then we can recognize God's holiness. Then we can grow more and more in our understanding of the significance and appreciation for the sacrifice that Jesus made on that cross, where he bridged that gap. Then we can love Jesus with a greater passion. We can't get rid of sin by focusing on the sin. If I tell you, don't think about purple elephants, you're going to be thinking about purple elephants no matter how much I tell you not to. You're going to, if I say, don't focus on your sin, it's the same way. But God tells us to cast that sin out of our lives. So we have that void that we need to fill. Let's fill it with the love of God. Then there'll be no room for that sin to return. 1 Peter 3:10 and 11 says, "For he who would love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it." So we need to battle sin, not just as it shows up in our lives with our words and actions, but battle it where it begins, with our thoughts and our motives. 2 Timothy 2:22 says, "Flee also youthful lusts, pursue righteousness, faith, love, peace, with those who call on the Lord out of a pure heart." And Hebrews 12:14 says, "Pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord." So going back to that passage in Luke that I began with, the key verse is verse 47, where it says, "Therefore I say to you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But to whom little is forgiven, the same loves little." So our love and passion for the Lord will grow if we truly understand the depth of our sin and the holiness of the Lord. And then that passion will motivate us to live a life more and more pleasing to the Lord. So we need to continue to battle against sin, recognize it for what it is, recognize how holy and righteous God is, and as we better sense the gap between the two, our passion for the Lord will grow, and we too will love much, because we will know beyond all doubt that we are forgiven much.